Hello, Cyberweb. This is Mr. Hosking for our final installment on the French Revolution and the collapse of Napoleon's empire. We've seen in the past that the ruling monarch, Louis XVI, abused his power and he had a bunch of problems, and eventually he is disposed by the National Assembly, and the National Assembly eventually executes him. And then the National Assembly starts to run wild underneath the control of Maximilian Robespierre, and they just start executing everybody. Hey, you over there, execute. Hey, you over there, you're executed. Hey, you, chop off their head. They just go nuts. Eventually, Maximilian Robespierre loses his head, and they fall apart, and they turn to a general to save France from invading countries all over Europe. And that general's name is Napoleon Bonaparte, and he takes control, eventually able to defeat all of France's enemies. And then he turns inward and invades Paris. Not a shot really fired, but he shows up to the government and says, I'm the ruler now, and the government has nothing that they can possibly do about it. But eventually Napoleon's head gets too big, and he's going to make three costly mistakes that lead to his downfall. The first mistake he makes is trying to create a system called the Continental System, in which all of Europe is no longer allowed to trade with England. He's mad at England for beating them in the Battle of Trafalgar, and they lost their fleet. So now Napoleon is trying to stop England from trading with the rest of the European nations that are around. And European nations aren't really afraid that much of Napoleon doing anything. He can't stop their ships going back and forth because he no longer has a fleet. So this is a failed system. The Continental System does not meet any success. And it angers Napoleon to the point where he decides to invade one of the countries that's still trading with Great Britain, and that's Portugal. But he has no fleet to move his troops around Spain to get to Portugal, so he has to march his troops through Spain to get to Portugal. Portugal is a small country on the edge of the Iberian Peninsula that's surrounded by Spain. It's landlocked by Spain, so you have to march through Spain to get there. The Spanish people don't care for the French troops being in their country, and they start a style of warfare known as guerrilla warfare. And if you pay attention at all to the United States and our military forces around the world, we're facing a lot of guerrilla style warfare throughout the world, where we don't know exactly who our enemies are. They kind of blend into the landscape. They don't face us like a natural army. They just kind of pop up out of nowhere, kill a couple of troops, and then disappear, or set up, in our case, for the United States case, they set up individual exploding devices, and our troops are getting killed, and we don't know who to attack and who to blame for those different attacks on our troops, because they just blend into the landscape. They blend into the natural population that's there. Well, that's what's happening to Napoleon, and his troops are getting killed by Spanish people who just blend into the Spanish countryside. You can't tell who to invade. So short of trying to kill every Spanish person as they're marching through Spain, Napoleon's troops are getting killed off, and they don't know who to attack. This causes a lot of weakness in the French army. The third and largest costly mistake that Napoleon makes is he decides to invade Russia, and that's going to fail with terrible loss of life. It's estimated that he enters Russia with 500,000 troops, and he makes it all the way to Moscow. But by the time he reaches Moscow, the Russians used a style of warfare called scorched earth, where they destroy everything in front of the army. So the army has no supplies. The army can't restock its food. The army can't get new clothing or anything of that nature. Everything around them within a 60-mile width is destroyed. So the army is stuck with its own provisions. They can't get any more stuff. They reach Moscow and winter hits. And so all of these troops in warm weather clothing are now stuck in the middle of Russia at wintertime. So a lot of people start dying of hypothermia. They start freezing to death. And so Napoleon has to turn his entire army around and march out of Russia. And that's when the Russian troops start to attack. They used horses and cavalry to do like really quick lightning attacks on the Russian army as they're trying to march away in the freezing cold, with their buttons like freezing to their skin and causing third-degree burns and stuff. So it's really bad for the French troops. I believe Napoleon leaves Russia with 60,000 troops. So they lost like 440,000 troops without actually fighting one major battle. It was a huge loss from Napoleon, and he's unable to recover from that many troops dying. So his downfall really comes after that. All of the nations of Europe kind of combine together. Prussia, Austria, Great Britain, they get together and they fight against Napoleon, and his army is defeated. Basically, his generals give up on him. His generals say there's no reason for more Frenchmen to die. We're going to not fight anymore. We're not listening to your orders anymore. We are surrendering. So Napoleon is captured and he's banished to the Isle of Elba. It's in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. But eventually he's able to escape Elba and return to France. And the people of France are all stoked. They're excited. Napoleon's back. He's going to bring greatness to France again. So they rally behind him and he starts to expand France's territory, invade other places. But he's defeated by the Prussians and the British at the Battle of Waterloo. And this time they banish Napoleon again. They don't kill Napoleon. They banish him. They don't want to make him a martyr. They banish him to the Isle of St. Helena, which is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, nearly impossible for him to escape. And that's where he dies, alone, isolated in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean by himself. This leads to the creation of the Congress of Vienna. This is where we're going to create a lasting peace all the way arguably up to World War I, where Europe will kind of have this balance of power. It's led by Baron von Metternich. He influences all of the other European rulers to create a stability in Europe. It's not about punishing France. It's about moving forward and not having a lot of war or battles or problems in Europe anymore, so that we can all expand and grow economically peacefully. France is kept intact. The balance of power throughout Europe is created under a policy they create called legitimacy. Anybody that was disposed by Napoleon, anybody kicked out of power by Napoleon was returned. So the monarchy is going to return to France. A monarchy is going to return to Spain. They're going to take the rulers that should be there and put them back into power. It's a fair settlement, and it does create a very long peace in Europe. Beyond that, some of the political changes that take place, Europe is a victory for conservatives. We talked earlier in an earlier video about conservatives wanting things to go back to the way they are, and that's what happens. The monarchs take back control, and although it's going to be constitutional monarchies where they don't have absolute power, the power will go back to a monarchy system, and we see nobility benefit from this. We see the Concert of Europe is created. It's a series of different alliances, and this allows nations to help one another in case of internal revolutions. This also leads the way to creating future alliances between the European nations. I just froze there, and Mr. Cope is in the room and he's giving me funny looks. It allows for future alliances to create, which causes giant problems at the start of World War I. We also see Latin American colonies begin to revolt against the Spanish rule. Spain is the only country that still has a lot of colonies throughout the Americas, and the Latin American colonies start to revolt, like Mexico, like Brazil, like Peru. And eventually all of the Americas are going to be free from European rule. And this idea of nationalism will grow even in Europe, and we see people with similar backgrounds want to unite under the same flag. So we'll see countries like Italy and Germany eventually unite into larger countries, which eventually causes problems because they're late to the party of creating countries, and they're not going to be able to have empires like Britain and France, and that causes some hard feelings. I hope this helps you fill out the guided notes. I hope everything is going well. I hope you learned a little bit about the French Revolution. Again, I'm Mr. Hosking. Have a great day.